Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Writers Block Presents Enterprise Hub with our current writer on the block, Caroline Smailes. Before we get going, for those who don't know me, my name's Jenny. I am a project assistant at WoW. I mostly work on the books and publishing side of WoW, and you've probably seen me in the background teching a few Writers Block events. We are currently live on YouTube, so if you don't want to be recorded, please feel free to turn your cameras off and interact with us through the chat. We advise watching this event in speaker view for the best viewing purposes. As usual, we ask you to treat each other and our artists with respect. You'll be able to join in today's discussion for our Q&A section, and you can do that in one of two ways. Either write your question in the chat, or if you're feeling brave, raise your hand, either literally or with the Zoom button, and ask your question directly to Caroline. So what is Enterprise Hub? Enterprise Hub is a fantastic program which provides 12 free hours of business support to Liverpool City residents. WoW is the only creative partner of Enterprise Hub, and we can offer you an initial consultation about your business idea, freelance plan, or existing business in the creative arts to connect you to the main hub and a business advisor. Today, as part of Enterprise Hub, Caroline Smailes is here to demystify the publishing process. So Caroline is an international best-selling author. Her debut novel, In Search of Adam, was published in 2007. The Big Issue North declared the book an engrossing and touching read from new talent. Since then, she has written 7 additional novels, 2 novellas, a musical, and co-authored a short story collection. The film of her novel, The Drowning of Arthur Braxton, won Best UK Feature at Raindance in November. Caroline also works as a book editor and director of Bubble Cow, a mentor for writers, literary chair, and associate lecturer in creative writing at LJMU. So welcome, Caroline.
Hello. Very exciting.
Glad to hear it. So I think to get started, I want to go back to something that you mentioned in conversation with Mikey at the beginning of the block. He said, and I quote, that you started writing very bad poetry that no one will ever read when you were a teenager. So I guess my question is, how did you go about starting your creative journey? What steps did you take from very bad poetry that no one will ever read to international best-selling author?
Gosh, I think I probably need about 5 hours for that, maybe a little bit longer. I think to kind of summarize it, there was probably a time when I thought, I'm going to be a poet one day. And then when I was actually at university, I wasn't going to university, I ended up going to university in Liverpool. And I would say that going to university broke my confidence in my ability to be a writer, like to kind of write. So I remember going along to a poetry society kind of night, and it took so much for me to go. I went on my own and had like a screw top bottle of wine and walked in, and my DMs on. I hadn't been at uni for very long. And I walked in, I sat at the back, and everyone else seemed to have this confidence that I didn't have. They all seemed to know what they were doing, and they stood up and they performed, and I wasn't a performer, and I didn't write again for 8 years. And it's really odd because I wasn't doing a creative writing degree, so I was doing an English literature degree, and I didn't want to write. So then after that, I kind of stopped completely. And then 7 years later, when I was going through grief after I'd had a miscarriage, I started writing because it was the only way that I knew to write through grief and emotions was through this creative outlet. So suddenly I was doing that and not doing my actual job, which, you know, I was teaching, and I was doing a PhD in linguistics, and it just kind of nothing slotted together. And like I spoke about this last time, how I did a creative writing course to give myself permission to write, but I think it was kind of, that was the step when I realized that I was older. You know, I was 29, I think, when I started writing, and I realized that this is what I want to do. And I'm really stubborn. I'm one of those people that rarely gives up on things, on people. I just rarely give up on anything. And I was on maternity leave actually at the time, and I was watching a Richard and Judy repeat one lunchtime when Richard called somebody a Nearly woman. He said that they were talking about a friend, and he was being really mean, and he basically said that she nearly did things but didn't finish them. And I had this in my head then, that I am being this needy woman. I need to do one thing or the other. I'm not doing anything. And that's how it started, which is, it's odd. And how I got to where I am now, I honestly, I can't think about that kind. There's not a moment where I thought, oh, I'm really confident, or I'm successful. It's not. It's a progressive kind of step by step. I tend to put myself onto paths that I can't get off, unless I complete things. So I think being stubborn and having a compulsion to write means that I've consistently published over the last 15 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's like an inner drive to do it. So you've...
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an inner drive. There's lots of different levels to it. There's a need. There's a need to make sense of situations. There's a drive, probably for legacy, for personal reasons, kind of to give voice. There's a need to, I talked about this in conversation, I'm obsessed with lost women, and to give a voice to women who've had their voice erased. So there's lots of different kind of levels, and I feel like I have to fight for every book, either on a personal level or in a kind of public level as well. I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But I think it's the journey of a writer. For me, if I thought about it too much, I'd do nothing. So it's step by step, or I'll get too overwhelmed.
So the confidence that you have to write is something that, I vastly admire that you've written so many books. So you've published 7 of those novels, but you've published 15, but 7 we know of. What is the process like? Like, what is the process of getting them from that initial, I wanted to write this thing, to now it's on the shelves in Waterstones?
Okay. Short answer to that, I'll go into long. The short answer is long. The process is really, really long, and requires a level of patience that I didn't ever think I could obtain. It's like this Zen-like level of patience I have now. So when you get an agent, from when you get a publisher maybe to having your book in print, holding it, is probably about 2 years. So, everything slowed down. In publishing, not hearing something doesn't mean that they're not interested. My last book, I gave to a publisher I think I gave it to them in the July. I didn't hear anything until the following January. And I honestly thought they weren't interested. And I just got an email saying, yeah, we want to publish this. And it was one of those where I thought, that's a long time. By Christmas, I was like, no, they're not interested. So I think it's time passes differently in the publishing world. So I think that there's that kind of view of it. Writing, what was the other question? Sorry, what was the process like?
What was the process like?
Okay. So first of all, I think when I think about the process, I've got to write a novel that publishers will want to publish. Yeah, that's kind of the first obstacle. Then I've got to find an agent who thinks they can sell that novel, which is a different thing again, because not all agents will have the contacts to sell the novel that I want, that I've written. Yeah, and I think the days of having one publisher and one agent for life aren't really realistic anymore. So then once I've found an agent, then they've got to find a publisher for the book. My journey is slightly different now because I'm so far in. So I actually found my publisher. I'd been published by HarperCollins before, but there was a day on Twitter that was Northern Writers Day, and I tweeted something and the publisher kind of DM'd me and we got into conversation and I sent the book directly to them. But mainly when you're starting off, you'll get an agent. They'll then send it to the publisher, and if the publisher likes it, then you've got initial edits, then copy edits, then proofs. Somewhere along there you'll get cover design, then you'll have decided who's going to sell your foreign rights, so then you might get foreign rights sales, audio sales, stage and TV kind of sales as well. So this all goes on over the process. So at the moment I have a book out in the summer, and I have had initial edits. I've had 2 sets of initial edits. I'm waiting for copy edits now. So I know that what I've got to do before the book can come out. And then in terms of like the continued process of it, you get, as a writer, you get royalties twice a year. So you get payment twice a year. So I get that in, everyone's the same. You get it in April and September. So this kind of the process, you've got all of these kind of stages going along after you've got the deal, but alongside that, you've got to be writing other books or having a career, you know, doing other things as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So the process in a long, like I've gone through it there, but it's long, you know, it's kind of, it's long. There are kind of moments where you feel like nothing's happening and then everything will happen at once. So it's the different skills, really.
Yeah. You said there about like when you're thinking of a novel that you want to write, and you need to find a publisher and an agent. That sounds very much like marketing. Like you need to find that gap in the market and fill it. And how do you like go about identifying those gaps? Do you find something you want to write about and then try and fill it, or?
Yeah, I think that it's dangerous if you kind of, there are lots of trends in publishing, you know, like we've had vampires and, you know, and if you think about, if you try to say there's a vampire novel out and vampires are really popular, everyone's publishing vampires. And like I said, it takes about 2 years. So say you jump on that trend, but in 2 years' time, it'll be something new. So really for me, it's about writing, keeping an eye on the market, but also writing something that you're going to write a good book. You know, you're going to write something that's publishable, that publishers you'll be able to sell to them because you'll be so passionate about it. It's not a kind of writing by numbers. I don't think that works. Sometimes publishers commission writers to write specific books. Well, they'll come to them with the synopsis and expect the writer to, you know, the writer will just write by their storyline because they have a gap in their publishing, in their titles that they want to fill. So that's normally quite a fast turnaround as well. You'd have to write that in probably about 3 months. So that's an approach as well when there are holes. So for me, it's not necessarily about, it's keeping an eye on trends, it's keeping an eye on genre, and not kind of just writing a book that's already out. But lots of people do that. They'll see something selling and then they'll write something very similar and they'll go to their agent and go, look, this is selling really well, I've written this. And sometimes publishers, especially competing publishers, will go for that, you know, and they'll give a cover that's very similar, you know, to the point where you almost feel like you've seen it before.
Yeah, I literally had that experience with a friend of mine in the bookshop the other day. They were like, that looks exactly like the cover of a book I read last week. And I flipped it over, completely different publisher, but same YA genre, same tropes.
Yeah.
And it was just that like filling a gap kind of market. But for you as a passion is like a really big factor in the novels that you tell.
Yeah, I think so. It has to be because I'm devoting so much of my time to it. And because of how I've approached my career, I think I'm in a privileged position to be able to do that. And I know that, so I don't rely on all of my income coming from writing. And that gives my, sounds really poncy, but it gives my creativity kind of the space to write what I want to write. Because I'm not relying on publishing to provide me, like to pay all my bills, you know. So I think it kind of takes some pressure off me. Sometimes I did do that. I got 2 big advances and it's like, right, I'm going to take 2 years. I'm going to take 2 years off work and I'm just going to write. And it's the worst thing that I've done. there was no need to do it for me. It didn't give me, I hardly wrote, it didn't give me the freedom I thought it would. It actually restricted me, terrified me. And I think I just work better when I've got deadlines, and like every day it's like, you're doing this for this hour, you're doing this for this hour, and I do different jobs all the time. And I think that just works better for my creativity to go, right, you've got an hour to write now, get those words out. I know everyone else is different, and there are people who go, right, I'm going to be a full-time writer, I'm going to do this all the time, but it just didn't work for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, there's hugely different approaches to writing practice. Like, I think Stephen King says he sits down at his desk at like 5 a.m. and will not move until he's hit like 2,000 words. And that some days might take until 6 a.m. and some days might take until like dinner time.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just trying to find the best way that you personally work and applying that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's about being realistic, not giving myself a hard time. But I was getting frustrated because I'd be sitting at my computer all day and thinking, I've got 2,000 words to write, and I'd be on Twitter, I'd just be annoying myself, like looking on eBay and buying rubbish just for the sake of it, anything to avoid writing. But then when I had to do a school run, it would be, okay, my brain would go, right, you've got half an hour now because you've got a school run. Then suddenly I'd be writing, and I just end up feeling so rubbish about myself. And I realized that I need that busyness, that works for me. When I wrote my debut, so after I was writing initially and then had to go back to work, and it was, I was writing, I had 3 small children, I was writing when they were in bed, and staying up really late and being shattered. I was writing in the car, it was one of those kind of, I remember when I did an interview about it when it came out, and they came around to take pictures and like, can you sit in your car and we'll pretend you're writing, that kind of like, because I'd written so much of it in the car. And I think that works best for me. And it's about part of the craft really, and part of taking the profession seriously is finding out what works for you and then doing it as long as you can when it's working. And then if it stops working, you have to find out something new, because you'll change, your process will change over the years as well. And my process changes with every book, so I think it is a case of finding what works for you and sticking to it until it stops working.
That's very fair advice.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned your debut, which was In Search of Adam.
Yeah.
And obviously you've had like huge success since then. But what was any like initial barriers you faced when you were first getting into the industry? Like, was there any, like, the publishing industry is notoriously like cutthroat. You face a lot of rejection. You get a lot of, maybe if you change this, thank you, but no. Like, how did you like deal with that? And what advice would you give to someone?
Okay, I'd say with traditional publishing, this was in 2006. I've talked about my journey into publishing and how I was discovered online. So I didn't have the kind of rejections that other writers talk about at that time. But the rejections that I've had along the way since, I think a lot of it has been about my northern voice, not being middle class, the kind of characters I'm writing about, that side of things. Everyone faces rejection in this industry. It is inevitable. But the way that I kind of work it in my head, so I've been rejected since with agents, giving my work to publishers, submitting to agents in the first place. I've had rejection all the way along, and it's really hard, but I've kind of, how I think about it now is slightly different. So I think there are different forms of rejection. So the early form of rejection, I would say, is from an agent. So you're submitting to an agent, and there'll be 2 reasons, really, I'm simplifying, why that work is rejected. So the first one would be that that agent doesn't believe that your work is good enough. Okay, so yes, have a tantrum, throw yourself on the floor, cry for hours, I'm all for that. But for me, it's okay. That agent doesn't think it's good enough. Well, how can I make it better? What am I learning from the feedback from the agent? it's one agent, fair enough. But say I submit to 15 agents and all of them reject it and all of them come back and say the same kind of thing, then I'm going to think, okay, maybe there's something that I can do to make it better. What do I need to do to make it better? So that's one side of things. Or the agent's rejecting it because it's not fitting the agent's list. It's not what they're looking for. And that's something I think writers really need to think about, that actually the rejection might be nothing to do with the quality of the writing. It's just that an agent's job is to sell your book. And agents have contacts with certain editors. And if they read your book and they don't have an editor in mind instantly, and they don't have the contact, then they're not going to take you on because they're thinking, I'm not going to be able to sell this book. So that kind of helps my head as well. So that's that form of rejection. But then say I get taken on by an agent and then I'm getting rejected by publishers, I think that's a different kind of rejection because I know my writing's good. I've been taken on by an agent who's a professional and thinks they can sell this book. So when I get rejected by a publisher, it isn't really about, it's horrible, but it isn't about the quality of the writing. It's just, it doesn't fit their list. I don't know what else they've got coming out. So I think I kind of go into it, and it's taken years to perfect that, but go into it with that kind of mindset and knowing that I only need one to say yes to it, and believing in the book. And it's horrible. It's an awful industry for rejection. And as writers, we have to be emotionally we need to have this depth of emotion that is beyond normal people's depth of emotion to be able to write well. But then we're told to get a tougher skin and to harden up when these horrible rejections are happening. But it's about not taking it personally and not carrying it and not having it become your identity, I think. Yeah, I think that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked what you said as well about having like faith in your project and knowing that you're a good writer, and maybe it's not for everyone, but it's always going to be out there for someone.
Yeah.
We got a message actually, and I'm going to reference it before the Q&A just because it links in quite well. A common barrier in publishing can quite often be, to my understanding anyway, social media presence. How much do you feel that social media affects publishing?
Affects publishing or affects your ability to be published?
Ability to be published.
Okay. I'm going to actually talk about this next week in my Bloc social, I think it is. I'm going to talk about a social media presence. I have a mixed kind of relationship with social media, but because I was discovered online, and I've kind of been in I've been in the right place at the right time. So social media has worked for me. But I do think that there are issues with how much we put out about ourselves and the expectations of writers now to be performing and be seen, when actually most of us are quite happy in our pajamas, locked in a room without having to be seen. Even in this environment, I'm live on YouTube. It's horrific and terrifying. It's like I'd be much happier kind of in my pajamas writing something. But there is an expectation now because of social media, especially from lockdown where everything's gone online. There is an expectation for writers to have a platform. And I think sometimes I'm nervous about expressing opinion online. There are times where I see something and I stop myself and I think before I tweet or think before I put anything out there about the pile-on effect that's going to come. How will it impact on my career? And I do think that I have to be, I have to make sure that I'm careful about everything that I say, everything that I do. So I think that social media does alter. I've seen it. I've seen how it can destroy someone's career. It's easy. You just need to go on social media and you'll see that. You can see how this pile-on effect when somebody does something that goes against what the characters they're writing or their kind of perceived image, or they have strong views on something. So I think that a platform's important, but I do know that every agent will Google you, so it is important to look.
Yeah,
you're saying.
So I suppose that's social media with the traditional version of publishing, but there's also the like more unconventional methods, like so there's self-publishing. Kindle's become huge, writers putting their books on like Kindle Unlimited and things like that. Do you have any you have experience with self-publishing, but could you share some of your experience with us?
Okay, so I have an editing company, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. So have experience of editing people who self-publish. And a few years ago, after one of my novels came out, I'm trying to think which one it was. One of my novels came out, and I decided that I wanted to do something to give back. So I wanted to raise some money for the charity 104, which helps women who've been abused. And I decided that I would ask people on social media, ask writers on social media to submit 100-word stories, all based on songs. And Nick Kershaw did the introduction for us, which is really, this is all for social media. And I self-published that anthology. So I kind of had experience of the self-publishing. I would also say now that I think that self-publishing still has a kind of stigma attached to it, an unnecessary stigma, because I think self-publishing is a legitimate, viable option depending on your writing goals. And a lot of people want a traditional book deal for different reasons. Often it's about kind of perceived status, or this desire to thinking that they'll only get a printed book if they go down a traditional path, and because of the reputation of self-publishing still. But now there are so many traditionally published writers who now have a platform who are deciding to self-publish. And they're making a lot of money from self-publishing, because especially genre fiction, writing a thriller with good marketing, they'll get their book edited and they can make a lot of money out of self-publishing, because really readers don't care who's published it. They just want to read the book. Unless you're in the industry, you don't really know if you do it well, you wouldn't know if something's being self-published. But I do think that you need a business head, self-belief, kind of determination, marketing strategy to be able to be successful in self-publishing. And there are the other kind of side of it is there are a lot of people who will just write something and put it onto Amazon, and that's their version of self-publishing as well, but it hasn't gone through the stages, the copy edits, the proofreading, the design, all these things that actually are part of the process that are needed to bring the book up to publishable standard. So for me, publishing and self-publishing are on the same level when they're done with the process. And I think that works really well. I edit somebody, I've been editing him for like 10 years now, and he brings out 2 books a year, and he writes thrillers, and they are the highlight of my year, editing his work. And he's hugely successful. He has no desire to be traditionally published, because he makes a full-time income from self-publishing, because he's built, he's had the marketing behind him, and he's built a platform, and he has readers waiting for his books. But that takes time, commitment, and a business savvy that not all writers have. These are completely different skills to being creative. And I would also say now that there's hybrid publishing, which is really interesting as well, which is an in-between. So the hybrid publishing, what you would do is you would pay, so the publisher is selective on who they take. So again, it's like you're submitting a book and they don't take on everyone. And then they manage the whole publishing process for you. So you'll get distribution, you'll get physical books. It won't just be like an ebook. You'll get physical books, you'll get distribution, that'll be edited, the cover, so the marketing, everything goes through the same process, but you pay for it. And then you get 50-50 royalty with the publisher. And that's about, I think it works out about 7,000 up front. So it's a lot. But there is that hybrid publisher as well. So that it's changing.
I mean, I've never really delved into hybrid publishing, but it's like an interesting concept as well. And the idea of self-publishing, I think like what you've said perfectly explains it, of when it goes through the necessary steps to get to a certain level. But do you also find that there's maybe a freedom in self-publishing that you don't necessarily get in traditional, like in terms of control over your final product?
I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing. For me, it's all about the team you surround yourself with. We can't be an expert at everything. So even like, so if you're self-publishing or you're traditionally publishing, get the team around you. Because cover design, you know, we're not experts on everything. We're storytellers. So you need that somebody who is an expert on cover design. You know, it's that kind of someone who knows how to proofread. It's a skill. All these different things. I think there is freedom, and especially when I talked before about the time scale as well, you could do it a lot quicker. You're in control. You'll be taking payments straight away. You won't have to wait for twice a year. You know, I can see why so many people, and you'll make so much more money if you're selling the same number of books that you would in a traditional book deal. You'll make a lot more money from self-publishing. Traditional book deal, you know, 50 to 70 pence per book. On self-publishing, you know, you're going to be making whatever you're selling it for minus, you know, your costs, which could be £4 or £5 per book. You know, so there are so many benefits, and there is the freedom, but it depends on goals. I know someone who was hugely successful self-publishing, like selling over 1 million copies of a book, but all she ever wanted was a traditional book deal because she wanted the book from a publisher. There was something within her that needed that. So it depends on your reasons for wanting to be published. You know, some people don't mind if they don't sell books. Some people want to be bestsellers. You know, it depends on your motivation for it, really.
Yeah, I find it really interesting as well what you said about having a team, because it kind of is like a false thing that's going around, like writing's a very isolating, well, not false, writing's a very like isolated task. Like you write the book and it's done and you've did it all on your own, but in reality it's a hugely collaborative process.
Absolutely. And I love that. Like, my editor reads the book and then comes back with these amazing suggestions that I've never thought about, you know. But it's about having people around you that you trust and that you can communicate with, and they want the best out of the product. You know, they send you emails and they're so excited about the book, you know, and that's lovely. It's kind of, but it's a team. And I think that's where, for me, it all goes wrong when you try to do everything yourself. Because also you become blinded. It's like, honestly, I've read the book aloud, I've gone through a spell check, I've done everything, and then they come back and there's like about 300 mistakes in there, and I've just been blind to it. You know, how have I missed all those mistakes? But it happens, and you need that fresh eyes. But it's hard to trust other people to look at your work and know that they're invested in it and they want the best for your writing. You know, it's a difficult thing to do.
I suppose that is the trick to finding an agent or an editor or designer, whoever that is as passionate about the subject matter as you are, to have that trusting relationship.
Absolutely, yeah.
I guess that kind of segues into my next question. You recently made a film of The Drowning of Arthur Braxton with Luke Huckforth, and I know for a fact he was very passionate about that project. So, what was that process like? How much involvement did you have in that?
See, I am of the belief that we create a piece of writing and it's a piece of art, and you give it to somebody else and they give their interpretation of it as well. When Luke contacted me, he was 21 and he's this huge YouTube celebrity. And I didn't know who he was at the time, but my daughter did. And I went to meet him in London, and my kind of agent at the time was like, what are you doing? You know, if we looked at some of his videos, they were very much teenage boy videos, you know, they were like on topics. I was thinking, you know, this is odd. And anyway, I went to meet him and he turned up with a piece of cake because he'd read that I liked carrot cake, and he turned up with a piece of cake. And he was just he was so passionate about the book. and so excited about it. And so I decided to take a risk and to give him, he paid for it, to give him the option for a year. So in that year, if he raised the money to make the film, then he'd be allowed to do it, because lots of books are optioned for film, but not many are made into a film. There's a big difference. But yeah, he raised the money by a Kickstarter over 3 days. It was absolutely insane. And so, yeah, he had the creative control over it. I stepped back. I went on set. My kids are extras in the film. And the premiere was in November. And I didn't actually see the film until it's quite a long time after it was complete before I saw it, because I didn't want to see it at the different stages. I was just aware that I would get one chance to see it for the first time. And I didn't want it to be the premiere, because all eyes were on me. You know, I actually at the premiere sat next to Luke, and that would have been horrific if it had been the first time I'd seen it. But for me, it was about giving up the creative control. I know other authors don't do that, but it felt right. It felt like the right thing to do, and trusting Luke to make the right creative decisions. But yeah, it was an amazing process. I'm kind of, the chances of it happening again, I don't know. I'm so lucky that it happened once in my career, but yeah, I'd love it to happen again.
I mean, it must be insane to have this idea one day. Not only do you turn it into a whole book that people are reading everywhere, but then someone else has this idea and turns it into a movie that everyone can watch. And it must be just like mind-blowing to think of it like in that progression.
Honestly, it's just because actually when I wrote Arthur Braxton, I wrote it all in longhand, all in a notebook. And I've got like lines in this notebook that I've written that are in the book and now in the film. And it's like, it's insane. Like, you know, I'm like all of you. I have a notebook, I started there, and that's where it's gone to. You know, that's what I said earlier about stepping onto a path. Sometimes you just go with it. And like even meeting Luke, it was like, don't think too far ahead, just take each stage, don't get carried away, and never assume, and just kind of go with it and see where it leads. And I think that's the beauty of creativity, isn't it? You put it out there and then just let it happen and see where it goes. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's like lovely, just to see the development and the excitement of where it's going to end up. So I'm going to move on to your lovely career as an editor, which you mentioned. So your editing company is Bubble Cow. What led you to start your own editing company?
So when I first got published, because I'd done a master's in creative writing as well, and I was given the opportunity to edit for a publisher. It just so happened, like I say, in the right place at the right time, and I was given an opportunity. And so what happened was I was thinking, okay, I'm doing this. What else can I do with these choices that I'm making, with these skills that I have? So Bubble Cow, which the name, at the time, it was very much a very current kind of name, but it started during the initial boom of self-publishing, which was in 2006, 2007. I was already editing for traditional publishers, so I had some kind of recommendations. I had like kind of evidence that I'd been doing it. And at the time, there was no editing service for writers who wanted to be self-published. So there was a gap in the market. And we created a service for writers with a simple pounds per word kind of format, which meant that the self-publishing writer had a budget for editing, and they had an accurate kind of understanding of upfront costs, because at the time there were people who would edit, but you wouldn't know how much it was going to cost you. And it was all very confusing about prices. So it was very much like, this is how much we charge per 1,000 words, so you can work out how much it's going to cost. And now, I mean, that started 2006, 2007. Now it's an international company. A lot of our work comes from America, and obviously the self-publishing market has taken off. So it was very much about looking at a gap in the market and then seeing what we could do to fill that and to kind of take steps. It was scary, but I was working, this portfolio career I have lots of different jobs at the same time. So again, I wasn't relying on it solely to bring in the income. And even now, other people run the company, and we employ editors. So, I now still edit. Like I have my favorites that I still edit and take on. I do some mentoring as well. But I think it was about recognizing a niche and looking at my skills at the time, and it's just developed from there.
So what, breaking it down, from the very beginning, how do you actually go about starting your own business? How do you go about saying, I want to set up this editing company? How do you do that?
Okay, so if it's editorial, I would say it helped to have testimonials, especially when large amounts of money are involved, because, if somebody's book is 150,000 words, and they're going to be paying a large sum for the service. So it helped to have testimonials. So I would say if you have the testimonials, then you're looking to position yourself in the market in terms of cost, pricing, and services. What can you provide? How does that compare with other people? Are you going to go a lot lower? Are you going to go higher? What's your niche? Then you need website, social media, a really clear marketing plan, because it's quite a cutthroat kind of industry. You need to keep an eye on the market, and it's about maintaining reputation and keep on updating your marketing plan for knowing the market, knowing the industry and the changes that are going all the way along. I find it really rewarding because I love editing, but I think that you need to have a passion. Everyone that we employ has this passion for editing and an eye for it, and I think that will come through when you're communicating with the writers. So you need to be kind of upfront about it. But for me, I think there is an expectation for testimonials, so getting experience before you attempt to set up the business, really.
So if someone did have a passion for editing, how would they go about taking steps to getting into that? Would they approach an editing company and say, can I do some experience with you?
I think so. So you're looking for testimonials as well. If you want to proofread, which isn't editing but similar, I do a course. But most editorial companies do employ freelance editors. We tend to look for people with experience in the publishing industry or postgraduate qualifications, and we look at training them as well. But contact companies, get some experience. That's my top tip, because the market's so crowded. But putting yourself out there, your passion will come through. Yeah.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the questions that are coming in through the comments. If you had one piece of advice, or any piece of advice, for someone who wanted to get into the creative industry, be it as a writer, an editor, or something else entirely, what would it be?
One piece of advice. One. I'm not very good at ones. Let's see. I would say persist. There is such a fine line between somebody who's published and someone who isn't published. And honestly, sometimes it feels like it's never going to happen. And that persistence, but in the meantime, you keep writing, or you keep, perfecting your craft, your trade, your skill, you perfect it. And if you say you want to go into editing and you want to be a fantasy editor, then you know the genre inside out. So it's about persistence and gaining knowledge, gaining experience. Don't give up. It sounds so it sounds ridiculous even saying that, but so many people give up, because it's hard, and it's long. It's long. It's going to take a long time, to the point where I now have a tattoo that says patience, just to remind myself every day that the time skills do not work in the publishing industry. So persist, keep going. Hope that's helpful.
I think it is massively. I mean, everything that we've talked around has kind of looped back to having that passion. And I guess if you have that passion, you going to persist with it no matter what.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really wholesome way to say keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
So we're going to open up some questions to the audience. If you have any questions for Caroline, feel free to raise your hand and Georgia will pull you up or type them in the chat. Yeah. So since we're on the topic, we got a question on, so Gemma says she uses Readsy to find an editor as she has no contacts in the publishing world. She's had a good experience so far, but what are your thoughts on it?
Thoughts on Readsy? They're my competition. Readsy are good. I think that it's really important if you're self-publishing or you're looking for an editor, to use an editing company that does a sample. You can get a sample of probably about 1,000 words that have been edited. I think that's really useful to see if you could work with the editor, to see if it interests you, if the feedback's of a good level, before you invest. So try and kind of communicate with the editor beforehand. That's my thoughts. I think that you'd also need to have a realistic plan for what you want to do, what you're going to do with the book. If you're going down that route of editing, what is your goal? What is your outcome for this book? Where do you want to go? That would be good. I think I've got a message that's come through as a direct message.
Okay.
So shall I read that out?
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the first thing that interests an agent? Is it you, your manuscript, your fan base profile, or your pitch? I would say that all of it. But I think ultimately your writing needs to be good. But, I think if we're being cynical, let's look at the number of celebrities that are getting published at the moment. Is it their writing or is it their fan base profile? We've got to look at it all, really. The manuscript needs to be good. It needs to appeal to the agent. The agent needs to be able to sell it. But then the platform that you have will help. Your pitch will definitely help, because that initial pitch is what's going to hook their interest in, and then the writing needs to be good. So it's a combination of everything. And that's something that I would say, that there is no point in approaching an agent until your work is the best it can possibly be, because you get one chance at it. And it's essential. You get so many people who write 2 chapters and think, oh, I'll approach an agent, and say the agent likes the 2 chapters and then say, right, send me everything else. And you've only written 2 chapters. You've kind of lost your chance there. So all of it needs to be good.
Patrick, I can see you've got your hand up.
Hi, Patrick.
Yeah, hi, Caroline. This is a little bit of somewhat follow-on in a sense, you know what I mean? Just a point of clarity for me from a discussion that we'd had earlier, with regard to dialogue of agents looking to find an excuse to refuse rather than take it on. So dialogue supposed to start on a new line, but if it starts after the line of description, is that something that would lead an agent or publisher to possibly dismiss it on first glance?
Okay, so I think that an agent's reading it for a reason, with a reason to reject normally. Mm-hmm. If you actually look at the statistics, which I'm going to say, but it's fear when we say it. If you look at how many people an agent takes on each year and how many people submit, the numbers are terrifying. Yes, so you're looking, there is an expectation that you're taking this seriously. Therefore, you will know how to use the craft. There will be exceptions, obviously, but generally there'll be an expectation for you to present your dialogue in the way that we talked about, in the correct way, in the correct manner. And then it won't distract the agent. The agent can then read your writing and enjoy your writing for its beauty, rather than, oh, look, they haven't learned the craft. I think that would be my answer there.
Right, thanks.
Is that okay?
Yeah, cool.
Quite similarly to that. So Jerry asked, can you get published if you are primarily writing for yourself, or do you need to find storyline genres that publishers will be confident to sell?
Say that again, Jenny.
So Jerry asked if you want to get published, but you want to write for yourself, so similar to maybe wanting to use a certain style of punctuation, or do you need to find storyline genres, like traditional forms that publishers will feel confident in selling?
But think that there are so many different publishers out there who are looking for different things. The task initially would be to find an agent that was interested in that kind of genre, in that kind of way of writing, which might be harder if it's very niche. So I think if there is a struggle there between finding an agent or finding a genre that's going to match it up, then if you have a platform, if you're looking at marketing, maybe you'll go down the self-publishing route. You know, I think it's, I don't think it's that straightforward. I think it just finding there will be agents who will be interested in, there's an agent interested in every single genre. You know, it's about doing your research to find the right agents. And on that note, I would say that, say you read a book and you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm writing something similar to this. If you look in the acknowledgements, most writers do acknowledge their editor and publisher in their acknowledgements. So that'll give you a hint or a clue where to look when you're submitting.
A little jumping off point, it's a cheat sheet in the back of a book.
Yeah.
Janaea, you've got a question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, it was just, I just really related to what you were saying earlier about having small children and trying to juggle writing and writing late into the night. And I just wanted to see if you had any tips for keeping your creativity levels up when you're like, you know, making tea in between and changing bums and whatnot.
Yeah. I don't envy you. But I've been there, so I do know. I think that for me, when I write, I go into this weird state of mind where I almost feel guilty because I don't feel fully present with them. You know, when you feel your mind like drifting off, and then there's like this additional mum guilt on top of everything else. So I think that kind of embrace that first of all. For me, having phone to, like, when you think about things, you know, and like sometimes when you, not a good example when you're driving, but, you know, if you can easily record when you've got ideas rather than having to write anything down, and setting yourself kind of time to write, giving yourself permission to write is really difficult. But maybe having those half hours, or having that, limit the time and say, right, in this half hour, I have to do the writing and no one else can talk, you know, really have to be strict with it. But the thing that I found hardest was the giving myself permission, because there's always something else to do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that needs to be that structure and that eye on the bigger picture, eye on where you're going, you know, because I needed to join a course because I couldn't manage it. I just felt so guilty all the time. So then suddenly I was doing a course, so I've got to do writing. You know, that works for me. So it's how you can trick your mind to make sure that you can make sure that you have time for your writing, because it should be a priority, because it's really important.
I also think as well, you know, being a creative person or writing it's a really good example to set. And I try and remind myself of that. You know, I'm sort of showing them that they can do whatever they want.
Absolutely. Honestly, like, my daughter went to a school that just kind of frowned on creativity, wanted her to do science or maths or whatever. You know, I mean, she hasn't. She's gone down a creative path, and just showing them. Yeah, it is really important. It is, because it's so. If anything, COVID must have taught us how important books and films and TV series and art, and all these things that are kind of frowned upon in school, you know, they're not being important subjects. And suddenly, look, what do we all need to entertain us during COVID? You know, it's all these art subjects that have been dismissed.
Oh, thank you.
That was a rant I was going on there.
Yeah, stop me.
That's more than fine. I think a lot of us found new creative outlets in lockdown. Do we have one final question from anyone before we wrap up?
I've got someone saying can't detect any northern accent. I am my mum's Maltese and my dad is a very working class Geordie, but I don't know what's happened to my accent. No.
Yeah. I'm only very close to Newcastle. We discussed, I think, the first time we ever met each other. Yeah. Angela said, thank you so much. This has been so helpful and interesting. And I think that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Caroline. This has been amazing. Thank you for demystifying the publishing process for us. So thank you for everything on getting published, life as an editor, and everything else that you somehow find the time in life to do. Thank you, Georgia and Janaea, for teching and moderating tonight. We'll be sending you an email with a moderating form. Please let us know what you thought of tonight's event. Your feedback is really, really important to us. Our next event with Caroline is Workshop 2 tomorrow night. If you want any tickets for that, they will also be in the email we send out this evening. So good night, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Bye.